May 4th, 1978. The plan says 0800 hours. At 0802, the Alpha bombs hit. Deep inside Angolan territory, the silence of the savannah is shattered by the thunder of SAAF Canberra and Buccaneer jets. In a matter of seconds, hundreds of fragmentation bombs, the deadly Alpha strikes, rain down on a former mining town known as Cassinga. As the smoke rises, the sky fills with white silk. 367 elite paratroopers of the South African Defense Force are dropping from the clouds. Their objective? Operation Reindeer. Their target was Cassinga, codenamed Target Alpha, which they described as a high-priority insurgent headquarters. But as the first boots hit the red dust, the reality on the ground becomes a chaotic nightmare that will haunt southern Africa for the next half-century. Was this a surgical strike against a military nest, or a cold-blooded massacre of refugees in a transit camp? Even today, mention the name Cassinga in Windhoek or Pretoria, and you aren't just talking about a battle. You are reopening a wound that refuses to heal. This is the story of the most controversial airborne assault of the Cold War. To understand Cassinga, we must look at the map of 1978. Southern Africa was a primary front in the global Cold War. On one side, the South African apartheid government, increasingly isolated but militarily formidable, sought to maintain a buffer zone against the spread of Soviet influence. On the other hand, SWAPO, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, was fighting an insurgent war to liberate Namibia from South African occupation. By early 1978, South African military intelligence assessed that plan had established a major logistical hub 250 kilometers inside Angola, Cassinga. For South African military intelligence, Cassinga, codenamed Target Alpha, was the brain of the insurgency. They reported seeing parade grounds, defensive trenches, and thousands of uniformed recruits prepared for a large-scale invasion of Southwest Africa. However, the international community and SWAPO leaders presented a different map. To them, Cassinga was a sanctuary. It was a refugee center housing thousands of Namibians who had fled the conflict, including women, children, and the elderly. The political tension was a powder keg. South Africa felt the pressure of a looming UN resolution that could force their withdrawal from Namibia. They needed a knockout blow to cripple the enemy's morale and infrastructure. They needed to prove that no matter how deep into Angola the enemy hid, the SADF could reach out and strike with impunity. The stage was set for a collision between tactical aggression and a humanitarian catastrophe that would change the course of the border war forever. Previously, we explored the geopolitical tension of 1978 and the dual nature of Cassinga, a strategic insurgent hub for the SADF and a refugee sanctuary for SWAPO. The stage was set for Operation Reindeer, 0802. The Alpha bombs hit as the camp gathers for the morning assembly, with many people out in the open. The strike is devastatingly precise, hammering the parade ground. Minutes later, the transports arrive, and the jump immediately goes wrong. The wind scatters the drop, and many of the sticks hit the wrong side of the Kalonga River. The plan was built on speed, but now the first problem is basic. Regroup, find your men, and get across a river while the camp is waking up. Those minutes matter because they create the gap that lets people run. Defenders reorganize, and the fights stretch far beyond the original window. Colonel John Breitenbach's men moved quickly, dividing into specialized platoons to sweep the camp. So before the assault even starts, the clock is already beating the paratroopers. However, the anticipated soft target vanished as planned fighters recovered from the initial shock. Heavy resistance erupted from zigzag trenches and bunkers, using RPG-7 and anti-aircraft guns leveled for horizontal fire. The defenders forced the paratroopers into a brutal room-to-room clearing operation. For hours, Cassinga became a labyrinth of fire, smoke, and screams. The SADF began systematic destruction of the infrastructure, but they were running out of time. The mission was designed for speed, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. While the SADF consolidated the center of the camp, a new threat emerged from the south. Intelligence had underestimated the Cuban presence in Chamutete, just 15 kilometers away. Around 1300 hours, a formidable Cuban armored column, led by T-34 tanks and BTR-152 armored personnel carriers, began a desperate charge toward Cassinga to relieve the besieged camp. The paratroopers, armed only with light weapons and limited anti-tank rockets, were now in a race against annihilation. This is where the Air Force saved the mission. SAAF, Mirage 3, and Buccaneer pilots flew at treetop level, performing high-risk strafing runs to halt the Cuban advance. The aerial bombardment turned the road from Chamutete into a graveyard of burning steel. Despite the airstrikes, the Cuban armor continued to push forward, coming within range of the extraction zones. As the Puma helicopters finally descended to evacuate the paratroopers under intense fire, the Battle of Cassinga reached its terrifying climax. The surgical strike had evolved into a full-scale international clash when the last SADF Puma helicopter vanished over the horizon toward Namibia. The silence that returned to Cassinga was not one of peace, but of absolute devastation. What cameras and international observers would find just hours later would transform a tactical military success into a public relations disaster that would haunt South Africa in international forums for decades. The scene was dantesque. Cassinga was strewn with bodies, many of them concentrated near the trenches and the parade ground where the Alpha bombs had detonated at the start of the raid. This is where history splits into two irreconcilable realities that define the war of memory. After the raid, two stories collided, and they have never stopped fighting each other. Pretoria pointed to what they said they captured and documented: weapons, uniforms, and operational material. Their position was simple. Cassinga was a plan, logistical, and command site, and the dead were largely fighters. SWAPO and the Angolan government presented a different reality. Cassinga as a refugee transit camp, and the death toll often given as around 600 as civilians, including women and children. Later, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation process also treated Cassinga as one of the most controversial external operations, and it did not close the argument about who exactly the victims were. What matters for this story is the fracture. One side needs Cassinga to be a military target. The other needs it to be a civilian tragedy, and that is why the name still burns. The reality, likely trapped in a bloody gray area, suggests that Cassinga was both an administrative hub with a military presence where thousands of civilians lived and transited. But in the war of propaganda, there is no room for nuance. The impact of Cassinga did not stop when the bodies were buried. It amplified the pressure around Namibia, hardened the diplomatic climate, and intensified international scrutiny of Pretoria. Later in 1978, the UN adopted Resolution 435, laying out the framework for elections and a path to withdrawal. Cassinga became part of the moral and political argument that shaped that moment, even as the war on the ground continued. Decades later, in the era of democracy, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, in South Africa attempted to shed light on the shadows of this raid. It was here that the clash of memories became institutional. SADF paratrooper veterans, many still proud of the operation's technical precision, testified about receiving fire from every building and trench, defending the strike's legitimacy. Conversely, Namibian survivors described a unilateral massacre against unarmed people fleeing toward the Kolonga River. For SADF veterans, Cassinga was their professional moment of glory, a flawless airborne operation executed under immense pressure. For Namibia, May 4th is not a military anniversary. It is Cassinga Day, a national holiday that serves as their own Alamo or Guernica. It is the annual reminder that their freedom was bought with the blood of those who fell in the red dust of Angola. Today, Cassinga remains a red line. You cannot discuss the border war without stumbling over this event. It is a reminder that in history, the technical truth of a military victory is often crushed by the emotional truth of a human tragedy. As long as survivors and veterans exist, Cassinga will continue to divide Southern Africa between martial pride and national mourning. The dust of Angola has settled, but the ghosts of Cassinga remain. Whether seen as a masterclass in airborne infiltration or a dark stain on military history, May 4th, 1978, remains the day the border war was rewritten in blood. Tactical victory or humanitarian disaster? In the end, Cassinga proves that the technical truth of a mission is often crushed by its human cost. This is Africa War Files. But if this breakdown changed the way you see air assault tactics, make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Tell me in the comments, what is the smallest mistake you have seen that ruined a whole operation, even if the world never heard about it? We will not stop digging.